Hello everyone, my name is Margaret, and today I want to share something with you that happened to me 3 weeks ago. Something that changed my entire perspective on life, on people, and most importantly, on myself. I'm 62 years old, and for the first time in my entire life, I walked into a shopping mall wearing a dress. Not just any dress, but a beautiful floral sundress that I had been hiding in the back of my closet for 2 years. What happened that day, the people I met, the reactions I received, and the emotions that flooded through me are things I never imagined experiencing at my age. But before I tell you about that incredible day, let me take you back to where this all started, because you need to understand the journey that led me to that moment. Growing up in a small town in Ohio during the 1960s and 70s, I was always different. My three brothers loved sports, roughhousing, and getting dirty in the backyard.
Me?
I would sneak into my mother's room when nobody was home and stare at her dresses hanging in the closet. The fabrics fascinated me. The way silk felt against my fingers, how chiffon seemed to float in the air, the weight of velvet, the delicate nature of lace. I remember being 8 years old, standing in front of that closet, reaching out to touch an emerald green evening gown she wore to church functions. My heart would race. Not from fear of getting caught, though that was certainly there, but from something deeper. Something I couldn't name back then. My father worked at the steel mill, came home tired every evening, drank a beer, watched television, and fell asleep in his recliner. He was a good man, a provider, but he had very specific ideas about what boys should be and what men should become. My mother was gentler, softer in her approach to life. She taught piano lessons from our living room, and I would sit on the stairs listening to her students stumble through Beethoven and Mozart. She noticed things about me that others didn't, or perhaps that others chose to ignore. Little things. The way I held a teacup. How I organized my school books by color. The fact that I preferred reading to playing football with my brothers. One afternoon when I was 11, she found me in her room. I had been careless, too absorbed in the feeling of her silk scarf wrapped around my shoulders to hear her footsteps in the hallway. I froze. She stood in the doorway, her hand on the frame, looking at me with an expression I couldn't read. My mind raced with excuses, explanations, anything to make this moment less terrible. But she simply walked over, gently took the scarf from my shoulders, folded it carefully, and placed it back in her drawer. Then she looked at me and said something I have never forgotten. She said, "Michael, there are parts of us that the world doesn't understand. That doesn't make those parts wrong. It just means we have to be careful about when and how we share them." She kissed my forehead and left the room. We never spoke about it again. High school was brutal in its own quiet way. I learned to hide everything. I dated girls because that's what was expected. I joined the chess club instead of the football team, which earned me the label of nerd rather than something worse. I became invisible, which felt safer than being seen. College offered a bit more freedom, but not much. I studied accounting, got decent grades, landed a job at a firm in Cleveland, and settled into what everyone called a normal life. I got married at 26 to a woman named Patricia. She was kind, practical, worked as a nurse, wanted children, and a house with a white picket fence. We had 2 kids, Daniel and Rebecca, and bought that house in the suburbs. But inside, that part of me never went away. It lived in secret moments. Late nights when Patricia worked the overnight shift at the hospital and the kids were asleep. I would go to the basement, open a locked trunk I kept hidden behind old Christmas decorations, and take out the few items I had collected over the years. A simple black dress I bought from a thrift store 3 towns over, paying with cash, my hands shaking as the elderly woman at the register smiled and asked if it was a gift. Stockings purchased online and delivered to my office. A wig I told myself was for a costume party that never existed. I would put them on and stand in front of the old mirror we kept down there, seeing someone else staring back at me. Someone who felt more real than the person I pretended to be every day. The guilt was enormous. I loved my wife. I loved my children. But I felt like a fraud, living a double life that nobody knew about. Every time I locked that trunk and went back upstairs to slip into bed beside Patricia, I promised myself it was the last time. Tomorrow I would throw everything away. Tomorrow I would be normal. Tomorrow, I would be the husband and father they deserved. But tomorrow always came, and that trunk stayed locked in the basement, waiting for the next moment of weakness. Years passed like that. Daniel graduated high school, then college, got a job in Chicago working in finance. Rebecca became a teacher, married a good man named Tom, moved to Oregon. Patricia and I became empty nesters, and with the kids gone, the house felt bigger and quieter. We had settled into a comfortable routine. Breakfast together, work, dinner while watching the news, reading before bed. Good companions, reliable partners. But something was missing, and I think we both knew it, even if neither of us said it out loud. Then, 5 years ago, everything changed. Patricia started getting headaches. Bad ones that no amount of medication could touch. After weeks of tests and appointments with specialists, the diagnosis came. Glioblastoma. Aggressive brain cancer, with a poor prognosis. She had maybe 18 months, they said. Maybe less. The world collapsed. Everything I thought mattered suddenly didn't. All those years of hiding, of pretending, of keeping secrets, felt so small and pointless in the face of losing her. During her illness, something shifted between us. Maybe it was the medication, or maybe facing death strips away the need for pretense, but Patricia started asking me questions she had never asked before. Real questions about happiness, about regrets, about the things we hide from each other. One evening, about 6 months before she passed, we were sitting in the living room. She was in her favorite chair, wrapped in blankets even though it was summer, and she looked at me with those tired eyes and asked, "Michael, are you happy? Have you ever been truly happy?" The question broke something inside me. I started crying, which surprised both of us because I hadn't cried in decades. And suddenly, after 40 years of marriage, I told her everything. About being 8 years old in my mother's closet, about the trunk in the basement, about the person I saw in the mirror who felt more authentic than the man sitting across from her. I expected horror, disgust, anger, demands for divorce even in her final months. Instead, she reached out her hand, and when I took it, she smiled. A real smile, not the polite ones we had exchanged for years. She said, "I know." 2 words that changed everything. She had known for years, she told me. Had found the trunk one day, while looking for holiday decorations. Had seen the bank statements showing purchases from specialty stores. Had noticed the way I looked at certain things, certain people. But she had loved me anyway, and she had waited for me to trust her enough to tell her. We spent her remaining months really talking, maybe for the first time in our marriage. She encouraged me to explore that part of myself. Said she wished she had asked sooner. Wished we had both been braver. After Patricia died, I went through the motions. Funeral arrangements, paperwork, thank you cards to people who brought casseroles. Daniel and Rebecca came home, stayed for a few weeks, then returned to their lives. I was alone in that house for the first time in 45 years. The silence was deafening. I would wake up in the morning and forget for just a moment that she was gone, turn to her side of the bed expecting to see her there. The grief was physical, a weight in my chest that made breathing difficult. But mixed with the grief was something else. Permission. Patricia had given me permission to be myself, and now she was gone, and I owed it to her memory to honor that gift. So slowly, carefully I started. I joined an online support group for people like me. Crossdressers, they called it, though I never liked that term. It felt clinical, like a diagnosis. But the community was welcoming. People of all ages, from all walks of life, sharing their stories, their struggles, their small victories. I learned about makeup from a retired veteran named Robert who went by Rose on weekends. About fashion from a college professor named David who had been living as Danielle for 20 years. About confidence from people who had lost everything and rebuilt themselves from nothing. I started small, wearing women's clothes in the house, then walking around the neighborhood at night when it was dark and nobody could see clearly. Baby steps toward something bigger. I found a therapist who specialized in gender identity issues, though I wasn't sure that's what this was. We talked for months about identity, about authenticity, about the difference between who we are and who we pretend to be. She never tried to label me or push me in any direction. just listened and asked questions that made me think. On my 62nd birthday, I made a decision. Rebecca called in the morning to wish me well, mentioned she was planning to visit in a few months. Daniel sent a text message with a gift card to my favorite restaurant. My brother Tom, the youngest of my siblings, sent his usual card with a generic message. I thanked them all and hung up the phone, and I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. Really looked. The gray hair, the wrinkles, the weight I had gained around my middle. An old man staring back at me. And I thought about Patricia, about our conversations in her final months, about wasted time and missed opportunities. That afternoon, I did something I had never done before. I went shopping. Not online, not in some distant town where nobody knew me, but at the mall 20 minutes from my house. The same mall where Patricia and I had bought school supplies for the kids, where I had walked laps for exercise during winter months, where everyone knew everyone because that is how small towns work. But I went as Michael, wearing my usual khakis and polo shirt, and I walked into a department store with a mission. The women's clothing section felt like foreign territory, even though I had been studying fashion online for months. Everything was organized in ways that made no sense to me. Sizes were different from men's clothes. Styles had names I didn't recognize, and there were too many choices. I stood there like an idiot, probably looking lost, when a saleswoman approached. Her name tag said Jennifer, and she was maybe 35, with kind eyes and a professional smile. "Can I help you find something?" she asked, and I froze. This was the moment. I could make up a story about shopping for my daughter, my niece, anyone but myself. Or I could be honest. Patricia's voice echoed in my head, encouraging me, and I took a breath. "I'm looking for something for myself," I said, my voice quieter than I intended.
A dress.
Something appropriate for someone my age. Not too flashy, but nice. Maybe floral. I watched her face for the reaction, the disgust or confusion or worse, laughter. But Jennifer just smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes, and said, "Of course. What's the occasion?" "Life," I said. "The occasion is just life." She helped me that day more than she could possibly know. Showed me different styles, explained what would work for my body type, suggested accessories that would complete an outfit. She treated me exactly as she would treat any other customer, with respect and professionalism. When I told her I wasn't sure about sizes, she directed me to the fitting rooms and said to try things on, see what felt comfortable. An hour later, I walked out of that store with 3 dresses, a pair of low heels, and something I hadn't expected.
Hope.
But buying the clothes was one thing. Wearing them outside, in public where people could see me, was entirely different. The dresses hung in my closet for 2 years. I would take them out, hold them up to myself in the mirror, imagine walking down the street wearing them. But fear always won. What would people say? What would my neighbors think? What if I ran into someone I knew? What if my children found out? The questions paralyzed me. Then, 3 weeks ago, something shifted. I was watching the news, some story about a person who had died trying to climb Mount Everest, and the reporter said something that stuck with me. She said, "He died doing what he loved, living authentically until the very end." That phrase, living authentically, it rattled around in my brain for days. What did that mean for me? How much time did I have left? I was 62. My father died at 70. My mother at 73. If I was lucky, I had maybe 10 more years. Maybe 15. Did I want to spend them hiding? The following Saturday, I woke up early, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table, making a plan. The mall opened at 10. I would get there right when it opened, when fewer people would be around. I would wear the floral sundress I had bought 2 years ago, the one Jennifer had said brought out my eyes. I would do my makeup carefully, following the tutorials I had watched online. I would wear the wig I had practiced styling. And I would walk through that mall, browse some stores, maybe buy something, and come home. Simple. Just a few hours of living authentically. Except nothing about it felt simple. My hands shook as I showered and shaved carefully, making sure my face was smooth. I moisturized, applied primer, foundation, powder, all the steps I had practiced 100 times in the privacy of my home. The makeup took an hour because I kept messing up the eyeliner and having to start over. Finally, I got it right. Not perfect, but good enough. The wig came next, a shoulder-length brown style, with subtle highlights. I secured it carefully, adjusted it until it looked natural, or at least as natural as a wig could look. Then came the dress. The floral sundress, with small pink and yellow flowers on a white background. It had short sleeves, a modest neckline, and fell to just below my knees. Appropriate, feminine. Something any woman my age might wear on a summer morning. I slipped it on, adjusted it, looked at myself in the full-length mirror. The person staring back was someone I recognized and didn't recognize at the same time. Margaret. That's the name I had chosen months ago, after Patricia's middle name. Margaret looked nervous, but determined. The shoes were the hardest part. Low heels, only 2 inches, but I had practiced walking in them around the house, and still felt unsteady. I grabbed a purse, transferred my wallet and keys, took one last look in the mirror, and walked toward the front door. My hand rested on the doorknob for a full minute before I could turn it. This was it. Once I walked outside, there was no taking it back. Neighbors might see me.
Cars might drive by.
This quiet life I had built could come crashing down. But Patricia's voice was there again, gentle and encouraging. Be brave, Michael. Be yourself. I opened the door and stepped outside into the morning sunshine. The drive to the mall took 20 minutes, though it felt like hours. Every red light made my heart race. Every car that pulled up beside me at an intersection made me want to hide. I kept my eyes forward, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. What was I doing? This was insane. I could turn around right now, go home, change clothes, pretend this never happened. But I kept driving, kept moving forward, because turning back felt like giving up on something important. The mall parking lot was mostly empty when I arrived, just a few cars scattered near the entrances. I parked far away from the doors, in a spot where I could sit for a moment and gather my courage. My reflection in the rearview mirror showed a terrified woman on the verge of either a breakthrough or a breakdown. I took several deep breaths, the kind my therapist had taught me for anxiety, and reached for the door handle. Walking across that parking lot was the longest walk of my life. Every step felt exposed. The sunshine felt too bright. The distance to the entrance seemed to grow rather than shrink. I kept expecting someone to yell at me, to laugh, to point and stare. But nobody was there. Just me and the sound of my heels clicking on the pavement and my own ragged breathing. The automatic doors opened, and I stepped inside. The cool air conditioning hit my bare arms, and I fought the urge to turn around and run. The mall was quiet this early on a Saturday. A few elderly people walking laps for exercise. Some teenagers sitting on benches staring at their phones. A young mother pushing a stroller. Normal people doing normal things. And me, a 62-year-old man in a dress, trying to blend in. I started walking, no real destination in mind, just moving forward because stopping felt more dangerous. Past the fountain in the center court. Past the shoe store where I had bought sneakers last month. Past the bookstore where I spent hours browsing every weekend. Everything was familiar and completely foreign at the same time. I waited for someone to notice, to say something, to react. But nobody did. People passed by without a second glance. It was almost disappointing in its normalcy. After 20 minutes of aimless wandering, I decided to actually go into a store. A clothing boutique that I had never been in before, the kind of place that sold scarves and jewelry and overpriced handbags. A bell chimed as I pushed open the door. The woman behind the counter looked up, smiled, and said, "Good morning. Let me know if you need any help." "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice coming out steadier than I expected. I browsed the racks, touching fabrics, looking at price tags, trying to act like a normal customer even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. The saleswoman, an older lady with silver hair pulled back in a bun, came over after a few minutes. "That color would look lovely on you," she said, pointing to a coral scarf I had been examining. "It would complement your dress beautifully." I looked at her, searching for any hint of judgment or mockery, but found only genuine friendliness. "You think so?" I asked. "Absolutely. Here, let me show you." She took the scarf and draped it around my shoulders, adjusted it, stepped back to look.
See?
Brings out the warmth in your complexion. And coral is very on trend this season. We talked about fashion for 10 minutes. Just two women discussing colors and styles, and what accessories work with what outfits. She showed me several other pieces, gave me honest opinions about what suited me and what didn't. When I finally purchased the coral scarf along with a simple silver bracelet, she wrapped them carefully and said, "You have a wonderful day, dear. Come back and see us again." Walking out of that store with my purchase felt like winning an Olympic medal. I had done it. I had interacted with someone, had a normal conversation, been treated like any other customer. The fear started to ease, replaced by something that felt almost like confidence. Maybe this wouldn't be so terrible after all. I continued through the mall, growing bolder with each step. I stopped at a makeup counter and tested some lipsticks, chatting with a young salesgirl who recommended shades that would work for my skin tone. I browsed in a shoe store, tried on several pairs, decided against buying any, but enjoyed the experience of being helped by the clerk who measured my foot and brought out different styles. I sat on a bench and people watched, something I had done 1,000 times before, but that felt entirely new from this perspective. Around noon, I realized I was hungry. The food court was starting to fill up with the lunch crowd, and the smell of pizza and Chinese food made my stomach growl. But eating meant sitting down, being visible, staying in one place where people could see me. It felt like a bigger risk than walking around. I debated leaving, heading home, calling this experiment a success, and not pushing my luck. But I was hungry, and running away felt like failure. So I got in line at a sandwich shop, ordered a turkey club and a lemonade, paid, and found a small table in a corner where I could sit with my back partially to the crowd. I unwrapped my sandwich with shaking hands and took a bite, barely tasting it, too aware of everyone around me. That's when I heard her voice. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" I looked up to see a woman about my age, maybe a few years older, with curly gray hair and bright blue eyes, holding a tray with a salad and iced tea. The food court had filled up and most tables were occupied. She was asking if she could share my table, which was common enough during busy lunch hours. But panic flooded through me. Sitting across from someone, having them look directly at me, possibly start a conversation, it felt like too much. "No, please go ahead," I said, because refusing would have drawn more attention. She sat down, arranged her food, took a sip of her tea, and then looked at me with a warm smile. "Beautiful dress," she said. "I love floral patterns. They remind me of my grandmother's garden." "Thank you," I managed. "I've always liked flowers." "I'm Dorothy," she said, extending her hand across the table. "Margaret," I replied, shaking her hand, surprised by how firm her grip was. What happened next was unexpected. We talked. Not about anything earth-shattering or profound. Just normal conversation between two people sharing a table. Dorothy told me she was a retired schoolteacher, had taught 3rd grade for 35 years. She was at the mall looking for a birthday gift for her grandson who was turning 7. Did I have grandchildren? Not yet, I said, though my daughter was married, and maybe someday. We talked about the weather, about how much the mall had changed over the years, about the best places to find good quality clothes without spending a fortune. It was so normal. So wonderfully, perfectly normal. Dorothy treated me exactly as she would treat anyone else, with kindness and casual friendliness. When she finished her salad, she gathered her trash, stood up, and smiled down at me. "It was lovely chatting with you, Margaret. You enjoy the rest of your day." "You too, Dorothy. Good luck finding that gift for your grandson." She walked away, disappearing into the crowd, and I sat there for a moment processing what had just happened. A genuine human connection. No judgment, no questions, no uncomfortable moments. Just two people being friendly to each other in a food court. It was such a small thing, but it felt monumental. Energized by this encounter, I decided to keep going. I wandered into more stores, tried on a blazer in one place, looked at books in another, tested perfumes in a department store. Each interaction became easier. Each conversation with a clerk or cashier felt more natural. The constant fear that had been my companion all morning started to fade, replaced by something lighter.
Joy, maybe.
Or freedom. or just the simple pleasure of being myself in public. Around 2 o'clock, I was browsing in a home goods store, looking at decorative pillows, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Michael? Michael Henderson. My blood turned to ice. I turned slowly and saw Barbara Chun, a woman I had worked with for 15 years at the accounting firm. We had retired around the same time, kept in touch sporadically through email, exchanged Christmas cards every year. She knew me as Michael, the quiet accountant with the wife who died a few years back, the guy who wore the same 3 suits in rotation and never missed a deadline. Barbara stood there with her husband, George, both of them staring at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Shock, certainly. Confusion. Maybe horror. This was the moment I had feared. Being recognized. Having my 2 worlds collide. I could deny it, pretend she had mistaken me for someone else, but we had worked in cubicles next to each other for over a decade. She knew my face. "Hello, Barbara," I said, my voice steady despite the panic coursing through me.
George. Good to see you both.
The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and heavy. George looked at his wife, then back at me, his mouth slightly open. Barbara's eyes moved from my face to my dress to my shoes and back up again. She was processing, trying to reconcile the person in front of her with the person she thought she knew. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Barbara spoke. "Michael, you look really happy." Those words. I hadn't expected them. I had expected judgment, rejection, maybe pity, but not that. I felt tears welling up in my eyes, and I fought to keep them from falling. I said. "For the first time in a very long time, I really am." Barbara smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her face. "Good. You deserve to be happy. We all do." She glanced at George, who still looked confused but nodded in agreement. "We won't keep you. Just wanted to say hello. Maybe we could grab coffee sometime? Catch up properly." "I'd like that," I said, meaning it. They walked away, and I stood there trembling, processing what had just happened. I had been recognized, my secret exposed, and instead of the catastrophe I had imagined, I had received acceptance. Kindness. Support. It felt surreal. I continued shopping, though my mind was reeling from the encounter with Barbara. Part of me wanted to leave right then to go home and process everything that had happened. But another part wanted to keep going, to push further, to see what else was possible. I compromised by deciding to make one more stop, a department store at the far end of the mall that I had been avoiding because it was always busy. The department store was packed with weekend shoppers. Families with children, teenagers in groups, couples holding hands. I wove through the crowds, feeling more visible, but also more anonymous than I had all day. In a crowd this big, I was just another person, another shopper, nothing special or unusual. It was liberating in a different way. I found myself in the jewelry section, looking at watches and necklaces displayed in glass cases. A young saleswoman approached, maybe 25, with bright red lipstick and an energetic smile. "Can I show you anything?" she asked.
"Just browsing," I said.
"But thank you." She nodded and moved to help another customer, and I continued looking at the displays. That's when I noticed the little girl. She was maybe 5 or 6 years old, wearing a princess dress with a sparkly crown, holding her mother's hand. She was staring at me with the unfiltered curiosity that only small children possess. Her mother noticed and gently tugged her hand. "Emma, it's not polite to stare." But Emma kept looking at me, and then she smiled, a gap-toothed grin that lit up her entire face. "I like your dress," she said, her voice carrying that particular loudness that children have before they learn about indoor voices. "It's pretty like a garden." "Thank you," I said, smiling back at her. "I like your crown. Are you a princess today?"
"Yes."
"I'm Princess Emma and I rule over all the toys in my room." She said this with complete seriousness, as if being royalty was her actual job. Her mother looked embarrassed, but also amused. "I'm sorry," she said to me. She's very direct. "It's fine," I assured her. Children have a honesty that adults could learn from. The mother smiled, relaxed a bit, And Emma continued telling me about her kingdom and her subjects, which apparently included several stuffed animals and a cat named Mr. Whiskers who didn't always follow the rules. Her mother finally managed to redirect her attention toward where they were supposed to be going, and they walked away, Emma waving at me over her shoulder. That interaction did something to me. A child had looked at me and seen nothing strange or wrong, just another adult who appreciated her dress and her crown. Children don't have the filters that adults develop, the prejudices and judgments and fear of difference. They just see what's in front of them and react honestly. And Emma's honest reaction had been acceptance and friendliness. I decided then that it was time to go home. Not because anything bad had happened, but because I had accomplished what I set out to do and more. I had spent almost 4 hours in public, as Margaret, interacting with people, shopping, eating, simply existing in the world. And for the most part, people had been kind. Some had been wonderfully, unexpectedly accepting. Yes, there had been a few strange looks, a couple of double takes, but nothing cruel or hostile. Walking back through the mall toward the exit, I felt lighter than I had in years. The heels that had felt so awkward that morning now felt almost natural. The dress that had seemed like a costume now felt like clothing. The wig that had worried me stopped being something I thought about. I was just a woman walking through a mall at the end of a shopping trip, tired but content. As I approached the exit doors, I passed a group of teenage boys, maybe 16 or 17, sitting on a bench. I tensed automatically, expecting comments or laughter. Teenagers can be cruel, especially in groups where they feel the need to prove something to each other. But as I passed, only one of them looked up from his phone, made brief eye contact with me, and then went back to whatever he was doing. No comments. No mockery. I was beneath their notice, which felt like a victory. The parking lot was fuller now, and I had to remember where I had parked. Walking between cars, I heard footsteps behind me and felt a spike of fear. But it was just an elderly man pushing a shopping cart, moving slowly, probably heading to his own car. He nodded at me politely as he passed, the universal acknowledgement between strangers in a parking lot. I found my car, got in, closed the door, and sat there for a moment in silence. It was done. I had survived. More than survived, I had actually enjoyed much of it. The fear that had consumed me that morning felt distant now, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment. I had been terrified of people's reactions, but most people hadn't reacted at all. Those who had noticed me had mostly been kind, and the ones who weren't overtly kind had simply been indifferent, which was almost as good. I drove home in a daze, replaying moments from the day. Jennifer's helpfulness in the boutique, Dorothy's warm conversation in the food court, Barbara's unexpected acceptance, little Emma's gap-toothed smile. Each interaction had been a gift, proof that the world was maybe not as hostile as I had imagined. When I pulled into my driveway and saw my house, familiar and safe, I felt a mixture of relief and reluctance. Relief to be home, to have privacy again, to shed the vulnerability that came with being seen. But reluctance too, because going inside meant this experience was over, and I would return to being just Michael, living quietly in his house, hiding parts of himself again. Except I didn't want to hide anymore. Standing in my living room, still wearing the floral dress, I realized something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't a one-time experiment or a bucket list item to check off. This was who I was, or at least part of who I was, and I didn't want to lock it away in a trunk in the basement anymore. I didn't have answers about what that meant for my future. Would I tell my children? Would I live as Margaret sometimes and Michael others? Would I transition fully, whatever that meant at 62? I didn't know. But I knew I couldn't go back to hiding completely. Over the next week, I thought about that day constantly. Replayed conversations, analyzed reactions, tried to understand what it all meant. I reached out to my online support group and shared my experience. The responses were overwhelmingly supportive. People congratulated me, shared their own similar stories, offered advice for next steps. I felt part of a community in a way I never had before. 10 days after my mall trip, I received an email from Barbara Chen. Brief, but meaningful. She said she had been thinking about our encounter, wanted me to know that she admired my courage, and invited me to join her and a few other retired colleagues for lunch the following month. She said I should come as myself, whoever that was, and that everyone was welcome. I read that email 3 times, feeling emotions I couldn't name. Acceptance from people who had known me in my old life felt incredibly validating. I also started working with my therapist on a plan for telling Daniel and Rebecca. That conversation terrified me more than anything else. They were my children, they had known me their entire lives as their father, and I had no idea how they would react to this information. My therapist reminded me that I didn't owe anyone an explanation for who I was, but that sharing my truth with people I loved could deepen those relationships. We practiced what I might say, how I might explain something I barely understood myself. 2 weeks after my mall trip, I decided to go out again. Same mall, but this time on a weekday afternoon when it would be even quieter. I wore a different dress, a navy blue one with white trim, styled my wig differently, tried a slightly bolder lipstick color. The fear was still there but reduced, manageable. I knew now that I could do this, that the world wouldn't end, that people were mostly kind or indifferent. This second trip was easier in many ways. I went to more stores, interacted with more people, even struck up a conversation with another woman in the bookstore about a novel we had both read. I ate lunch in the food court again, though this time Dorothy wasn't there. I bought a pair of earrings and a scarf, treating myself, enjoying the simple pleasure of shopping for things I actually wanted to wear. But the most significant moment came near the end of this second trip. I was leaving the mall, walking toward my car, when I heard someone call out, "Margaret! Margaret, wait." I turned and saw Jennifer, the saleswoman from my first shopping trip 2 years ago, hurrying across the parking lot toward me. She was out of breath when she reached me, smiling. "I thought that was you. I wasn't sure at first, but then I recognized the way you walk. How have you been?" The fact that she remembered me, recognized me, called me by the name I had chosen, meant everything. "I've been good," I said. "Really good, actually. Thank you for asking. And thank you for helping me that first time. You have no idea how much that meant to me." Jennifer waved off the gratitude. "It's my job. But I'm so glad to see you out and about. You look wonderful. Much more confident than that first time." She checked her watch. "I'm on break for 15 more minutes. Want to grab a coffee? There's a shop right inside the entrance." We sat in that coffee shop and talked for those 15 minutes, then 20, then 30 as Jennifer's break ran over. She told me about her life, her struggles with her own identity as a bisexual woman in a conservative family, her journey to self-acceptance. I shared more of my story, about Patricia, about my fear, about how shopping in a dress had become a gateway to living more authentically. When Jennifer finally had to get back to work, we exchanged phone numbers and promised to stay in touch. Having a friend who knew me as Margaret felt significant. My online support group was valuable, but having someone local, someone I could potentially meet for coffee or lunch, someone who understood, was different. Better in some ways. More real. That evening, I sat down and wrote an email to Daniel and Rebecca. Not to send immediately, but to organize my thoughts, figure out what I wanted to say. I explained my journey, my struggles, my late-in-life discovery of this part of myself. I told them about their mother's acceptance and encouragement. I assured them that I was still their father, that nothing fundamental about our relationship needed to change, but that I wanted them to know all of me, not just the parts one had shown them their entire lives. I saved that email as a draft, not ready to send it yet, but feeling better for having written it. When the time was right, I would tell them. But I needed to be more secure in myself first, more certain of what I was asking them to accept. 3 weeks after that first mall trip, I went out again. And then again the following week. Each time became easier. The fear diminished. The joy increased. I started varying where I went. Not just the mall, but grocery stores, libraries, restaurants. I walked around my neighborhood in the evening, wearing casual women's clothes, no longer waiting for darkness to hide me. Neighbors noticed. Some looked confused. A few were clearly uncomfortable. But many were kind, waved hello, treated me the same as they always had. Mrs. Peterson, who lived 3 houses down and was 82 if she was a day, stopped me one evening as I was walking past her house. I braced for confrontation, but she just smiled and said, "I like that blouse, dear. The color suits you. Would you like to come in for some tea? I just made a fresh pot." We sat in her kitchen, drinking tea from delicate china cups, talking about gardening and the weather and how much the neighborhood had changed over the years. She never asked about my clothes or why I was wearing them. She simply accepted my presence and made me feel welcome. When I left an hour later, she hugged me at the door and said, "Come back anytime. It gets lonely sometimes, and I enjoy the company." These small moments of acceptance from strangers and neighbors built up over time into something larger. A foundation of confidence. A belief that I could live authentically without losing everything. Yes, some people would judge me. Some would reject me. Some relationships might not survive. But others would accept me, support me, maybe even appreciate me more for being honest. 1 month after my first trip to the mall, I finally sent that email to Daniel and Rebecca. Different versions, tailored to each of them, but essentially the same message.
This is who I am.
This is what I've been hiding. I love you.
I hope you can accept me.
Then I waited, terrified, for their responses. Daniel called 2 days later. His voice was confused, concerned. He had a lot of questions. Some I could answer, some I couldn't. He needed time to process, which I understood. But he ended the call by saying he loved me and that we would figure this out together. That was more than I had hoped for. Rebecca's response came via email the next day. Longer than I expected, full of emotions. She was shocked, yes. Confused about what this meant for our family, for her memories of her childhood, for her understanding of who her father was. But she was also compassionate. She referenced her mother, said that Mom had hinted at things over the years that she hadn't understood at the time, but now made sense. She asked if we could video chat that weekend, really talk about everything. I agreed, grateful for her willingness to engage rather than shut down. That video call with Rebecca was one of the hardest conversations of my life. I had to be vulnerable with my daughter in ways I never had been before. Had to admit to decades of hiding, of not being fully present, of living a lie in many ways. But Rebecca surprised me.
She cried, yes.
She had questions I couldn't always answer. But she also said something I will never forget. She said, "Dad, my whole life you taught me to be honest, to be true to myself, to never let fear control me. And now I understand that you were teaching yourself those lessons too. Better late than never, right? I'm proud of you. Mom would be proud of you." Hearing my daughter say she was proud of me, after I had just revealed something I thought might destroy our relationship, broke something open inside me. I cried on that video call, really cried in a way I hadn't since Patricia's funeral. And Rebecca cried too, and we talked for 3 hours about the past and the present and what the future might look like. Now, 3 weeks later, I'm recording this video to share my experience with all of you. To tell you what happened when I finally took the terrifying step of going out in public as my authentic self. The reactions I received. The kindness from strangers. The acceptance from people I knew. The joy of simply existing without hiding. I won't pretend it's been easy, or that everyone has been supportive. Some people in my life have distanced themselves. Some neighbors crossed the street to avoid talking to me. I've received some hateful messages from people who found out through the grapevine. Not everyone is kind. Not everyone understands. But enough people are kind. Enough people do understand, or at least try to. And that's been enough. Today, I wear women's clothes most of the time. Some days I'm Michael, some days I'm Margaret, and some days I'm something in between. I'm still figuring out what all of this means, where I'm going, who I'm becoming. Maybe I'll transition fully. Maybe I won't. Maybe the labels don't matter as much as I thought they did. What matters is that I'm not hiding anymore. What matters is that at 62 years old, after 6 decades of fear and secrecy, I'm finally living authentically. If you're watching this video and you're struggling with your own identity, with your own secrets, with your own fears about being yourself in public, I want you to know something. It's terrifying, yes. But it's also liberating in ways you can't imagine until you experience it. People are mostly kind. The world is mostly accepting. Yes, there are jerks and bigots and people who will judge you. But there are also people like Jennifer and Dorothy and Barbara and Mrs. Peterson and my daughter Rebecca. People who will see you, really see you, and accept you anyway. Sometimes even love you more for having the courage to be honest. You don't have to do it all at once. Start small. Wear something that makes you feel authentic in the privacy of your home. Then maybe around your neighborhood at night. Then during the day. Then to a store. Baby steps toward freedom. And find your community. Online support groups saved my life in many ways. Connecting with people who understood what I was going through, who had walked this path before me, made everything more bearable. I'm not an expert. I'm not a spokesperson for anyone but myself. I'm just a person who spent most of my life hiding and finally decided to stop. And I wanted to share what happened when I did because maybe my story will help someone else take that first scary step toward authenticity. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And if you have your own stories about coming out, about being yourself, about the reactions you've received, please share them in the comments. We're all in this together, figuring it out as we go, supporting each other through the scary parts and celebrating the victories, no matter how small they might seem. Until next time, be kind to yourselves. Be brave when you can. And remember that it's never too late to start living authentically.